Welcome to Art Ed Radio, the podcast for art teachers. This show is produced by the Art of Education University, and I'm your host, Tim Bogantz. A couple of weeks back, I was having a conversation with some colleagues about different options for kids, what they could do after high school. And one colleague mentioned that a couple of our students went on to do some atelier training. And another colleague remarked that she had no idea what atelier training even was. And for those of you who haven't heard of atelier training or don't know what that is, atelier schools are basically specialty art schools that train students in realistic drawing, realistic painting skills. There's long history of that we'll kind of dive into today. And though they are few and far between, there are still atelier training opportunities out there. And in kind of a serendipitous occurrence, a couple of days before this conversation, I had just been in contact with Mandy Theis, who is the director of the School of Atelier Arts. Now, she's a former art teacher, and I guess still an art teacher professor at this point, but she's interested in helping art teachers learn more about atelier training and showing them just some of the opportunities that are out there. But as usual, my guest can explain all of this far better than I can. So let me bring her on now, and we can learn more about the atelier training. All right, Mandy Theis is joining me now. Mandy, how are you?
I am well. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, I am really excited to have you on the show to talk about all things atelier related. But I guess to begin with, can you just give us a quick introduction? Tell us who you are, what you do, maybe a little bit about your journey as an educator.
Absolutely. So, as you said, my name is Mandy Theis. I am currently the director of the School of Atelier Arts, and I run a master's degree program in partnership with the Florence Academy of Art, and I'm a professor there in that program. And, my education journey, like many of us, has been twisted and turned and, has a lot of interesting, points along the journey. So I graduated from Montana State University in 2007 with a double degree in graphic design and art education. I taught in Montana at some very small rural schools, like 100 kids, K-12, so
Wow, yeah.
It was like a really fun experience though, because you'd have like kindergarten and then you'd have like your seniors and then you'd have middle schoolers. So, more so than any other job I ever had, I really got to learn what is it that kids can learn at what age, because I had this laboratory, right? So, sometimes, I'd just finish a high school lesson and my second graders would come in and be like, oh, what are you doing? And I'd end up teaching some high school lessons to second graders. And I'm like, wait a minute. But, the problem with this is that if you teach all your high school lessons to these elementary kids, then you run out of lessons.
I was going to say, what are you going to do when they get to high school?
Exactly. So I found myself a few years into my career being like, oh my gosh, I think I've taught my kids everything that I know about art that took me like 16 years to learn.
Right.
What am I going to teach them next? And so I really started like looking for books or things. And, a question that had come up a lot in my first few years of teaching is, Miss Theis, how do I make this look real? I want it to look real, so I was particularly interested in trying to answer that question, for my kids, because I felt like they were looking to me for help with something that was really important to them. And I didn't have the answer. And I felt very insecure about not knowing how to help them. So eventually I read this book by Julia Aristides on atelier training. And I'd like to warn everybody about this book. It is a very, very dangerous book, okay? Because I ended up leaving the teaching profession, moving to Seattle, Washington to study with Juliet for a number of years, 4 years, full-time study.
Wow.
To learn what she introduced me to in this book. So she has a lot of books out, but the book I read was called Classical Drawing Atelier. And once I learned that atelier training existed, there was like nothing that was going to stop me
Love
from
it.
getting this. So that's a little bit about my journey. So as I was getting my atelier training, I found that, all these people around me, my, fellow educators and stuff are like, oh, Mandy, what's this thing you're doing? How did you
Yeah.
post this? I saw your drawings before and now I see your drawings now. Like, how did you do that? Right. And so I started going to like art education conferences and stuff and just
Mhm.
sharing a little bit about what atelier training is. So.
Yeah. So I wanted to just ask you about that too, because,
Mhm.
I don't know that our audience is all going to necessarily be familiar with that. So, can you just, I guess, tell us a little bit more about what atelier training is, what the goals are, and I guess, you talked about kids wanting to draw realistically. So, like, when you're going through atelier training, like, what transfers to our students? Like, what can you take from that and teach to our students?
Oh, these are all amazing and very good questions. So, and there's some long answers. So buckle in, everybody. We're going to talk about atelier training. Um, atelier training is basically the way that artists were trained in the United States and a lot of the Western countries until about 100 years ago. And what happened is that atelier training, for a variety of reasons, fell out of favor. But what atelier training is basically working under a master artist in a very specific, disciplined way to learn the techniques of drawing and painting that are already known. So, I often compare it to like a classical music conservatory. So,
Yeah.
it's an intensive amount of training where you're focused on nothing but learning art for under a master for a number of years. And that's how long it takes
Mhm.
to like really learn how to draw and paint in a really high level. So
Okay.
if you think of like Da Vinci or Rembrandt, like Da Vinci didn't wake up painting like Da Vinci. He didn't wake
Right.
up one day being like, I'm going to make the Mona Lisa, right? He trained with Verrocchio for 10 years, right?
Yeah.
Like that's how long it takes to really master a skill set. Or, same with Rembrandt or, almost any artist that you think of that is a quote unquote old master artist, they all train in atelier. They didn't magically reinvent all these skills.
Mhm.
They learned what was already known about art and then added to it, in their own special way. So that's essentially what atelier training is. Now, what happened in the United States and in Western Europe, World War I and World War II were brutal for ateliers. Like literally, the artists were killed in these wars that
Okay.
were running them. And at the same time, you have a rise in interest in modern art, which was very much about
Mhm.
ideas and not so interested in the technical aspects of
Right. Right.
drawing and painting. And then the Cold War certainly didn't help things because Russia maintained this tradition, this atelier tradition, and the US therefore felt that it was really bad. And so the atelier training that still existed in pockets was actively targeted, as well
Oh,
as
okay.
being communist realism, right? So we still hear that phrase bounced around a lot, like communist realism,
Yeah.
because frankly, of the CIA's very decided effort to stamp out this communist
Okay,
situation.
so I'm sorry to interrupt, but just like,
Uh-huh.
I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I learned about like how involved the CIA was in the modern art world, and
It's
it blew my mind.
it is crazy. Like we think of, oh, those poor Russians, they had the state controlled art, poor them. And like, at least they knew they had state controlled art. Right? But like Clement Greenberg, the critic that
Yeah,
basically made Jackson Pollock, like
yeah,
he was paid by the CIA through this false front of the culture of congressional
yeah.
freedom. So,
I
or
know, I know.
Congress of
Like,
Cultural Freedom. Yeah. So
I was gonna say
I
that
can
could
go on a
be
long side.
it could be another entire podcast. Maybe we should
Yes.
do that one in the future, just like
I
how the
would
CIA affected modern art.
I would love
So,
that. We should get the lady that wrote the Cultural Cold War book on too,
oh
and like
yeah,
really
that'd be
go
good.
into it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, sorry, that was a big tangent. But anyways, for a lot of reasons, atelier training fell out of favor. And also related to the World War II, the history of art education, like most universities didn't have an art education degree until after World War II. And what happened is that these all these soldiers came back from World War II. They had the GI Bill. All of a sudden, universities had to vastly expand their course offerings. And one of these course
Mhm.
offerings that was often added was an art education degree. But because this was happening in the 50s at the peak of McCarthyism and anti-communist realism and things like that, all of the professors for these programs were specifically selected to not have any form of atelier training, right? Because, the belief at the time was that an untrained artist was the most pure. Picasso really pushed that idea, even though Picasso himself had atelier training from his dad who trained in an atelier.
Right. Like if anybody's seen Picasso's like really early work, like you can tell.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Mondrian was classically trained in the French atelier system. A lot of what we think of as the modern masters had atelier training, and it was a choice for them. But what happened in the 1950s is that choice was taken away by hiring people that specifically didn't have the technical drawing and painting skills. The only choice left was this modernism. And, I think modern art has a lot of perks to it. Like sometimes people think that if you like atelier training, you must be super anti-modern art. And that's definitely a misnomer. That's like not my stance at all. But I do think that it's extreme because it's all ideas without the technical execution to support them. So by the 1980s, there were only two places basically left in the world that were still school-like, that were actively training ateliers. One was in Boston and one was in Florence, Italy. So Nerina Simi was running the studio in Italy, and Gamel was running the studio in Boston. There were other brief pockets, one of my favorite thing is Andrew Wyeth, to talk about Andrew Wyeth.
Okay.
Because his father and his grandfather were both classically trained artists, right? And a lot of artists at the time, especially after World War II, they went into illustration because it was the only safe place to practice the craft of drawing and painting. And so even though N.C. Wyeth, his grandfather, was an illustrator, he was classically trained. He had a lot of the atelier training. He trained with atelier trained artists who trained his son, who then trained his grandson. So Andrew Wyeth wasn't a self-taught artist. I cannot stand when I read that Andrew Wyeth was a self-taught artist. It's a lie. It obviously doesn't make any sense because he had inherited thousands of years of artistic information through this lineage that was just exclusive to his family because his grandfather and father didn't run an open school, but they did train his grandson.
Okay.
So anyways, if you look at the MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art, they just remodeled. But for years and years and years, no one knew where to put this Andrew Wyeth painting because it involved all this technical skill, like Christina's World, the one with the lady in the field, looking out. It was hanging by the bathroom for years, just alone by the bathroom, because it was definitely a modern artwork, but it didn't fit the ideas of what modern art can or should be. And so even though it was this really powerful modern artwork, for years and years and years, MoMA had it hanging alone by the bathroom. So I feel like that's a good symbol of where atelier training has kind of been viewed by the establishment, for the last 50 years or so. But the interesting thing is that many things, it's become this countercultural movement. So this idea of having the technical skills to really execute your vision without compromise, to actually be able to create the artwork exactly as you imagine it in your head and heart without, having to compromise anywhere because you didn't have the skill to execute it. And this has become really appealing to contemporary artists and general public as well. And I find it really interesting too that really big names in the modern art world, like Damien Hirst, for example, he shut himself away for a number of years trying to actually learn how to paint. And he painted all these realistic, photos of butterflies, and he called them fact paintings, right? But from my perspective and being atelier trained, I saw that he's trying to learn how to actually paint. He actually wants to learn his craft. And then Jeff Koons did something similar not too long ago too, where he did this whole Blue Ball series where he was basically making master copies of paintings and then floating a blue ball in them. So even these very, what we see as, icons of contemporary art recognize the desire and need for technical skills as a marriage in creating great art.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, because, you mentioned just sort of the appeal to artists, appeal to the public, and even just, kids who are coming into our classrooms, they want to learn to draw realistically. And so,
Mhm.
and you had mentioned earlier, you're just, when you first started, you didn't necessarily have those skills or didn't necessarily know how to
Not at
teach
all.
that really well. And so
Not at all.
I'm just thinking
Yeah.
about that, for teachers, like, do you feel that that's something that everyone can teach? You know?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. There are a few things that I've learned on this journey. One is that anybody can learn technical and drawing skills. It's not
Hmm.
magic. No one bought me on the head with a talent fairy, but you do have to train with somebody who has the skills. And because the
Hmm.
skills are largely lost, it's actually quite difficult to find somebody to train with that has
Right.
atelier
Right.
training. There aren't that many places out there. They're growing as the countercultural movement continues to
Hmm.
explode. Our teachers have this need, often to get a master's degree or a curiosity about, hey, I never learned how to draw or paint in my
Yeah.
undergraduate
Yeah.
program. How could you? The undergraduate programs were intentionally run by people that didn't have training. They were designed to exclude this knowledge from you.
Right.
But if you want them now, you can, this program we have is for 3 summers. So we did it in the summers because that's when teachers are most likely to be
Yeah.
able to do the
Yep.
training.
Yep.
And we send you to one of the most beautiful ateliers in the world. It's terrible. You have to spend your last year in Florence, Italy. And, so we have like remote and in-person options for the first 2 years. But the third year, everybody has to go to Italy. It's very traumatic, I'm sure.
Yeah. Sure.
Um, and they get this experience of learning some of these drawing and painting techniques. So really bringing the accessibility to our teachers is a big piece of the puzzle, but also just making it safe for art teachers, because I know when I first learned about this, I was furious. I was so mad because I'm like, isn't this what I should have been learning in
Right.
college? Like,
Right.
I paid how many thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars in my undergraduate degree, and like my painting instructor in college was a sculptor. Like, he didn't even know how to paint, right? And it was like, oh, do what you feel, or whatever. And even knowing what I know now about oil painting, like, we did some very downright dangerous things, right, out of
Yeah.
ignorance from
Right.
a professor that's supposed to supposedly know how to paint. So when I learned just how much knowledge I felt like I'd been cheated out of in undergrad, I was furious. And then also I felt incredibly insecure because I'd been teaching for a number of years, right? And like,
Hmm.
if I went to this atelier and I said, hey, these skills matter, I'm also saying, hey, what I taught my kids for the last few years maybe wasn't as good as it could have been, right? Or
Yeah.
maybe I wasn't giving them the knowledge that as an educator I'm responsible for giving them. And that is a mind heart mess, right? Like, trying to sort through those feelings
Right.
um,
Right.
and just trying to give myself permission, like, okay, well, I didn't know that then, but I can learn it now. And if I call atelier training like going to Hogwarts, right? Because
Okay.
I always, from second grade on, I went on this field trip to an art museum and saw this painting. And I was like, that's what I want to do with my life. I just knew in that, experience in that moment that I wanted to paint like that. Right. And I spent the next 20 years trying to learn how to paint like that. And no matter how many classes I took or whatever, no one was able to teach me that. But all of a sudden, there's this magic school. And if you go to it and you work really hard and you read your potion books and you work under an exacting master who's not going to hold punches on you, right? Is going to tell you
Yeah.
exactly why your art is sucking that day,
Yeah.
then you can learn to weave this magic. You get this magic wand where you can create any of the artwork that you imagine exactly the way you intend it without compromise. And
Hmm.
that's the most incredible thing in the world to me. And I definitely
Yeah.
want to share that with other art teachers and with their students too, because it doesn't have to be that we have to compromise on our art. You can actually learn and teach the skills that you need to create the artwork exactly the way you intended it.
Okay, so I want to ask you about that because,
Mhm.
I'm just thinking about, those ideas, just kind of in relation to where art education seems to be right now.
Mhm.
There's a huge focus for all of us teachers on creativity. A lot of teachers are very invested in student choice and individual voice. And I think there's kind of a struggle there because, we only have so much time. And if we're
Sure.
going to push for more realism, or,
Mhm.
if we're going to dedicate a significant amount of time to developing like realistic drawing, realistic painting skills, like how do we balance that? Like, how do we bring together sort of that push for realism and the skill that you need
Mhm.
to develop those ideas, but also have that goal of allowing space for student choice and student voice? Like, how do we balance all of that?
Right, absolutely. So that's a very loaded question, and
I was
there's
gonna
kind of
say
like
I don't want it to
few
be
answers here.
yeah.
Yeah. So I want to address the choice-based thing first, and then get into the bigger part of the question. So, one of my really good friends is Cynthia Gaub, and she's a leader in the choice community, and I'm obviously a
Hmm.
leader in the atelier community.
Hmm.
And, we often talk about how we're both advocating for something that's different than traditional art education or how it's been, for the
Right.
last 100 years or so.
Right.
And we're so far apart from each other that we're actually next to each other. It's not a line, it's a circle, because
Yeah.
there's a lot that we both believe in. So we both believe in individual student work. In the atelier, you're largely working on your own project that, like your own still life that you set up for your purposes and your reasons and your composition. And it's the instructor's job to help you achieve the vision the way you intend to have it executed. So to eliminate that gap between your intention and your execution, that's the atelier training's job. And I think that a lot of TAB people or choice-based people, advocate for a lot of the same thing: independent studio practice, right? And
Hmm.
exploration of the materials, and pushing yourself into deeper exploration. A lot of those concepts are the same between the two. So sometimes people are like, oh, it's either this or that. And I think when it comes to at least choice-based and atelier training, there's so much overlap there. It's just that it's kind of like Cynthia would say, I think that it's like a modified tab where there's like a technical component and then the studio work
Hmm.
is how she, I believe, would describe it. We should ask her. But that's my understanding, and not being a tab expert or a choice-based expert. Um, but I also want to address, there's an underlying assumption even in the question that you asked, like, how do you feel about teachers, with creativity? And the assumption is that, oh, technical skills are the opposite of creativity. And
Right.
I don't think that's actually true. In fact, the more you learn about the technical aspects of drawing and painting, the more you truly appreciate the creativity and innovation that happens in the technical progress and advancement in the craft of drawing and painting. Um, at the risk of going a little technical here, I'll try to give an example, and you let me know if I go too far.
No,
Too
this
far.
is really good because like what I wanted to ask you about next is balancing, the technical side with the creative side. So yeah, I
Oh,
would I
perfect.
would love an
Okay.
example. So please
Okay.
please dive deep.
Okay, everybody. Like this, we're going into atelier training, so stay with me here. Um, okay, so one thing that people think is that people that draw and paint realistically, that they're looking at something and they're just copying everything that the way that they see it, right?
Right.
But this isn't actually true, and it's not true for a lot of reasons. But one of those reasons is that your eye can perceive brighter brights and darker darks than what we have pigment to achieve. So if you have a light on in a room and you are trying to paint it, we don't have white that's bright enough. Even if you hold a white
Hmm.
piece of paper up next to a light, it's like 4 value steps darker than the light, right? But the
Yeah.
paper's the whitest we can get if we're doing a drawing. So
Yeah.
we can't actually copy what we're seeing. Now, what we can
Hmm.
do is we can purposely diminish the values around the light. So we can purposely darken everything else darker than the way we actually see it, so that the white of the paper has the same jump between the light and what's around it as what we observe. So we can recreate the relationship of how light something is compared to how dark the things around it are, but we cannot copy the exact value of the light.
Hmm.
Okay, so how do you solve this problem as an artist? There's so much creativity and so many innovations that have happened throughout the history of technical drawing and painting. One of my favorites is something called broken color. So these painters were facing this problem where they were observing something that was brighter than their pigment could achieve, right? So
Yeah.
the old way of doing it was to darken everything around it, like what we just talked about. But what the kind of impressionists came up with is, when you look at something that's really, really bright, it kind of makes your eye vibrate a little bit, right? It changes. You have to, dilate your pupil or
Yeah.
undilate your pupils, right, to receive. So there's like a physical reaction. And they came up with this idea of, are there other ways to kind of make your eye vibrate? And they found that if they put one really chromatic color right next to a very contrasting chromatic color as a highlight on a light area, it created that vibration in your eye. So it
Mm,
feels brighter, but who would have thought that putting colors that don't actually exist, that you don't see there, but
right.
using those colors, which are actually darker than the light you're trying to paint, could create the vibration and give you that. And if you look at, especially like still lifes of shiny objects that were done in the Impressionist era, you'll see this broken color a lot, where there's two colors that are not white that are representing a really shiny highlight on a metal vase or something. And I mean, how innovative and creative is that to even come up with that solution? So there's so much creativity in the technical aspects of art. It's just that because the technical aspects of art have not been taught and they're not broadly known, the creative aspect of it is not as well understood as the idea aspect of art, which is very well taught and very, well covered in contemporary art education practice.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So no, I appreciate that answer and just kind of getting your thoughts on all of that. Another thing that I wanted to ask you about, and I guess this is sort of a big jump from where this conversation has been going, but just as I was thinking of things I wanted to get your opinion on, I was thinking about AI. Because, when we think about atelier training, I'm transported back, like hundreds of years to Da Vinci, things like that. And you just think of it as a very old school thing. And just the idea of technical skill, just even though it's not completely traditional, as evidenced by what we've been talking about today, that's still kind of the thought that everybody has. And so I'm just thinking about, those skills, like how valuable they are, and just sort of how they contrast with all of these, new types of art that are being made, just as AI is becoming more and more prevalent.
Sure.
So, in all of that rambling and ranting right there, my question would be like, what do you see just kind of in the near future here as the role of the artist? Like what kinds of skills do you think artists need, and what kinds of things do you think they should be focused on in relation to what we're seeing with computer generated work?
Oh, sure. So, also really big, pressing question of the day, not just in
Yeah,
the arts, right?
yeah, for
AI
sure.
is both fascinating and terrifying at the same time. But, AI is derivative. It can only create from what already exists. So
Hmm.
artistically, we're seeing it create some really interesting paintings that seem to us to be like the old masters, right? But
Yeah.
they couldn't exist without the originality of the old
Yeah.
masters, right?
Yes.
They're derivative. So I think actually AI is going to push artists to be more important than ever, because the appetite for original imagery is only going to snowball with this consumption that is being increased by people's ability to get their ideas. I think the interesting thing about AI is that it's allowing people to get their ideas for an artwork out there without compromising technically in some ways,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So they're getting all the joy of the technical achievement without having to learn the craft,
Right.
and
Right.
they're getting their idea out without compromise. Now, imagine what you could do, because even with all the AI tweaking or whatever, like it's never exactly as you imagine, right?
Hmm.
But if you love the idea of being able to create anything you imagine, you would love atelier training.
Fair.
It's like
Fair.
your
Yes.
own internal AI system. But that being said, the quality of what goes in and the quality of the program matters a lot for the quality that comes out. And I actually talk a lot about the video game industry, because
Hmm.
in the video game industry, there's a strong desire to create believable worlds. So realism is like
Right.
really, really desired in the video game industry. But the
Hmm.
video game industry is largely unaware of atelier training. There's a disconnect between the two.
Yeah.
And so the video game industry keeps trying to pursue better and better pixels per inch or more information. Like if we can only get more information into this image, then it'll look more real. But
Hmm.
atelier trained artists know that that's actually the exact wrong way to go about it. That if you want something to be more believable, that you need to focus on what you want to be seen and purposely diminish what's not important. So in these video games, for example, you'll have, let's say, a robot with a light coming from the left and a really, really bright reflected light coming from the right. But the problem with that is that, anytime you want something to look really believable, really round, if you want that robot to look really dimensional, you want to emphasize what we call the form, the light areas, right? And you
Right.
want all the
Right.
pixels to be on there. And do you know what actually makes it look more round is flattening the shadow. So by not allowing all this distraction and visual vibrancy for the eye and the shadow, it allows the eye to travel over the form in a rounded way. And so if these video game people understood that it's not about showing every little thing, it's about judiciously highlighting what's most important and diminishing, creating a
Hmm.
hierarchy for the eye, because that's how humans actually see, because we're not
Right.
robots. We don't see
Yes.
everything all at once. They would get that what they're after with this believability. It's just that they don't know it exists right now. Like atelier training, I'm telling you, in the 80s, like there were maybe, these schools were maybe graduating 5 students each, maybe like in a
Hmm.
year. And, think of like how near extinction, like thousands of years of inherited
Yeah.
artistic information that have
Yeah.
been painstakingly handed down from artist to artist was nearly lost. And then you have this whole industry that isn't considered high art by, the elite, if you will, in the video game industry, wanting more than anything to do this. And they don't even know where to look. They don't
Yeah.
know that it exists. So, as an educator, I just am so passionate about make it a choice, right? Like if you want to drip paint on canvas, a la Pollock, and that's your choice, that's amazing. And like I celebrate that, right? But if
Hmm.
you really wanted to do this other thing, but you gave up on it because your execution didn't match your vision,
Right.
you you need his atelier training, and that will get you there. You don't have to compromise. You don't have to choose something else or go a different pathway. There is a pathway for you. It exists. I found it, and now I'm trying to help other art teachers find it, and it's called atelier training.
No, that's awesome. Okay. Yeah, I don't know, just a lot to think about there, and I really appreciate all of that. But I guess last question for you, just before we go. I would love for you to share where people can learn more. Either about you and what you're teaching. Your program. What teachers may want to learn themselves and take back to their students. Just any final thoughts or final things you want to share before we go.
Absolutely. I really appreciate the opportunity. As I developed atelier training, I recognized that more and more teachers were asking for it. So I created a whole series of lesson plans where you don't have to have any atelier training yourself, but they will teach your students and you, if you don't know it yet, some really important atelier skills. So I have one on portraiture, one on how to draw people, and I just put out one on color theory.
Okay,
Newsflash, there's no
I
such thing as
actually
warm and cool colors.
I was gonna say I read the color theory one. It was very good. I really enjoyed it.
Oh,
So
thank you.
anyway, sorry to interrupt, but I
Oh,
was
no,
excited
no, I
about that one.
appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, the things that I learned in my art teacher education, there's a lot of bad knowledge because we eschewed technical knowledge for so long. Sometimes the remnants that remained got misconstrued and misunderstood. And yeah, there is no such thing as warm and cool colors. And I have a free color theory training at schoolofatelierarts.com that will teach you why that's true. So if you just go to schoolofatelierarts.com, you can sign up for that class on the homepage. Um, and then, we have these lesson plans that are available to purchase that take you through atelier skills. So it's not just about drawing a person, for example. Like a
Hmm.
lot of people are like, they're going to start with drawing an eye, right? But with atelier training, you always want to go from the biggest idea to the smallest idea. And the biggest idea of a head is the ball in the back of your head. Like your head
Right.
weighs how many pounds? And this
Yeah.
is massive back here. And you can see the back of your head from the front of your face, right? But what do people do? They start with an oval, right? They forget
Yep.
about the back of the head. So, just really basic concepts, and then they accelerate quickly into more and more sophisticated concepts as you go from beginning to end through these worksheets. So if you don't have any atelier training, but you have a student that's interested in drawing people realistically, for example, that's a good resource for you. I also have a YouTube channel where I teach atelier skills and I answer common misconceptions. Like, what are triadic colors? Do we really think we know what they are? Because they're different than what we've been taught in our education up to this point. And then also, as I mentioned earlier, I partnered with the Florence Academy of Art to offer an actual intensive experience, because true atelier training, I trained in atelier, Juliette's atelier, for 4 years, but I also trained several additional years in other ateliers, right? So it's not something you can just snap your fingers and like, oh, I'm going to flip a switch and I'm going to have this thing. No, it's a commitment. And so I had these lesson plans. I was giving workshops at state conferences, but the master's degree program is a way to really get a solid foundation in atelier skills. And so that's why we created it. That's why we created it for the summers. That's why we made both remote and in-person options for it. And the opportunity to train an authentic atelier in Italy. So that's some of the things I'm doing to share atelier training with my fellow art educators and hopefully the broader audience and their students.
Yeah, that is awesome. Well, Mandy, thank you. I appreciate this entire conversation, from, the deep dive into atelier with all of our art history tangents, and it's been really enjoyable for me. So thank you.
I appreciate that. I can geek out on art history all day long, anytime. It was a pleasure being on your program. Thank you for having me.
All right. I had a lot of fun with that conversation with Mandy. Apologies for nerding about art history multiple times, but honestly, that's the good stuff. That's what I get excited about. But I also loved a little dive there at the end into video games, and I'd love to talk more about lots of this, but that was a longer episode, so I want to wrap it up. But if you want to know more about anything that Mandy discussed with me, anything about the School of Atelier Arts, anything else, we will make sure that we put a lot of links in the show notes. And as she said, she was able to find what she was looking for in atelier training. And if you think you or your students are interested, you may be able to find something as well. So if any of that piques your interest, I would definitely suggest checking it out. Art Ed Radio is produced by the Art of Education University with audio engineering from Michael Crocker. Thank you for listening as always, and we will talk to you again next week.